Hi guys, so here's an epic rant by James O'Brien on the issue of dishonesty, but also honesty in politics. So stick around also for my response after his monologue. Enjoy.
You can't really get much worse than the worst economic performance in the G7 and the worst excess death rate in Europe. I joke a lot about people who are so blind to reality that they have their football scarves tied so tightly around their neck that the oxygen flow to their brain has been cut off. But today, if you're in the business of doffing your cap and tugging your forelock at people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, Ian Duncan Smith and Digby Jones and Boris Johnson, how the hell do you do that today? The worst excess death rate in Europe, the worst economic performance in the G7, the tension between health and wealth, clear from the start, never a straight choice between the two. We said on day one, didn't we? It's all about balancing health and wealth. They've managed to mess up both. That's quite incredible when you think about it. You know, you look at a country like Sweden, which has 5 times the infection rates of its nearest neighbours and its worst drop in GDP, I think, in history. But actually, compared to other European Union countries, they're going to be able to make a case for having at least got something sort of right. Sort of right. Not a country like New Zealand, absolute A+. Germany, B+. The United Kingdom, well, England, it's a U. Is that still a grade in it? It's not even a grade in A-levels anymore, is it? A U? So, unclassified. It's astonishing. And yet, you know, today it just feels bleak. Schadenfreude is a very thin gruel, isn't it? You waving your little flags at Boris Johnson thinking he was going to bring some sort of, I don't know, what was he going to bring? Get it done was the thing. Oven ready? You know? 350 million quid for the NHS, that's on him as well. And here we are. The worst excess death rate in Europe and the worst economic performance in the G7. So I wasn't being facetious. If you've just tuned in, you won't believe me now, will you? Because I wasn't being facetious when I said, can you think of any glimmers of hope? But I am, desperately in need of them. You see, being proved right doesn't pay the bills or save other people who have been proved wrong from unemployment and potential penury. You know, there's no pleasure in winning an argument when the victims are the people you were arguing with. I've tried to explain this from the start. I haven't done a perfectly good job of it, I don't think. But you know, it's that weirdest thing about putting the cheats and liars from 2016 in Downing Street. The fear was always not what they did, because that is something you could move on from, but what will they do next? And now we know. Now we know. Coronavirus was always going to hit us hard. It would be nice if it had hit us as hard as, say, Germany, rather than harder than any other country in Europe. The economic impact of a lockdown was inevitable. Clarity and leadership was about balancing the two and fine-tuning the tension between health and wealth. Clarity and leadership was about letting us know what was being done and why. And if you want a crash course in what clarity and leadership looks like under these people, have a look at what they've done with the A-levels overnight. Step away for a moment from the economy. Step away from the death toll. Forget for a minute about the carnage in the care homes. Forget about the absolute travesty of a test and trace system that was supposed to be world-beating on June the 1st. Forget about all of that. Just look at the latest story. Forget about the dinghies, please, goodness. Don't forget about the dinghies, whatever you do, because that is what you're supposed to be looking at today. Forget about the worst performing economy in the G7 and forget about the worst excess death rate in Europe. Look, some dinghies. Grrr, fury. It's quite incredibly transparent. The actual Home Secretary today on social media or last night fighting with an ice cream company. Or not even with an ice cream company, fighting with the Hoxton hipsters who run the social media account of an ice cream company. Home Secretary, third most senior member of the government, of a government that's presided over the worst excess death rate in Europe and the worst economic performance in the G7. What's the third most senior member of the government doing today? Shouting at ice cream. And also putting on her crossface while being filmed in Dover. I mean, come on. When do we wake up? When do we actually sort of start acknowledging that the problems being caused by politicians will never be solved by being vile to people born in foreign countries? Gone off on a bit of a tangent there. But it's all linked. Of course it's all linked. It all comes back to clarity and leadership. What do you want, clarity and leadership, or someone screaming at ice cream? I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. That's government policy now. And the A-levels, as I say, are the best example you'll find of the complete absence of clarity and leadership. Do you even know what Gavin Williamson has announced overnight? Nicola Sturgeon, you'll remember, did something that I think those of us stuck in England will find almost unrecognisably honest. She very simply just did this.
A very difficult and unprecedented situation. We took decisions that we thought on balance were the right ones, and we took them with the very best of intentions. These were broadly the same decisions that have been reached for England and Wales as well. But our concern, which was to make sure that the grades young people got were as valid as those they would have got in any other year, perhaps led us to think too much about the overall system and not enough about the individual pupil. And that has meant that too many students feel that they've lost out on grades that they should have had, and also that has happened as a result, not of anything they've done, but because of a statistical model or an algorithm. And in addition, that burden has not fallen equally across our society. So despite our best intentions, I do acknowledge that we did not get this right, and I'm sorry for that. But instead of doing what politicians sometimes do and dig our heels in, we are determined to acknowledge that and to put it right. There are, of course, deeper questions that we will need to resolve for the longer term about the impact of exams on the attainment gap and on the difference between exams and teacher judgment. But the most immediate challenge is to resolve the grades awarded to pupils this year. As I've said, we will set out our approach tomorrow to the Scottish Parliament, but let me be clear that we will not expect every student who has been downgraded to appeal. This situation is not the fault of students, and so it should not be on students to fix it. That's on us, and we will set out tomorrow exactly how we intend to do that.
That's the long version. But what was remarkable about that was, remarkable today, it wouldn't have been remarkable yesterday, would it, in broad terms, I mean a few years ago. Not only admitting that they got it wrong, but explaining how and why they got it wrong. Now, if that was happening every day, we'd have a problem, wouldn't we? We wouldn't, I mean, it's all very well saying, I really admire politicians who admit when they've made a mistake. But if that was all they did, you know, you do worry that if Boris Johnson started admitting to mistakes that he's made, he would never stop talking. He would have to continue admitting to mistakes that he's made until the end of time as we know it. But there is a politician, a senior politician, explaining that, the head of a government, explaining what they got wrong and why they got it wrong, and explaining how they're going to make amends, how they're going to try and fix this mess that they have made. We've got Gavin Williamson, who last night said, A-levels should go away and shut up.
So James has raised a number of very interesting points here. The first one being tribalism, or sometimes what he called footballism. And what he means by that is that people will wear a certain coloured scarf and they will wrap it around their neck and they will ignore the faults of that team, and they will continually criticise even good actions taken by the other side. And you can see this continually, and this has been exacerbated under Brexit. The fact that the Tories, who had led the Brexit charge, are continually protected by their supporters. No matter what Boris Johnson does, it's always good because it's for Brexit. These same people would say that they don't care if Boris Johnson lies. He's lying for a good cause. He's lying for Brexit. And these people are so embedded in this belief system, in this dogmatic belief system, that they are happy to endure suffering in order to, in some twisted logical way of theirs, to own the other side. Now, in another way, it's like a cult or like a religion, is the fact that it's not good enough that I believe it, this is the Brexiteer, you have to believe it too. And you can see many Brexiteer channels who are now not satisfied with convincing the British people to support Brexit. They need to expand Brexit across Europe. So they're now making videos about how Ireland needs to leave the European Union, how Italy needs to leave the European Union, how France, and etc., have to leave, and how the citizens of those countries are crying out for freedom. and the Brexiteers are willing to lend a hand in some way. Now, something else James O'Brien talked about was this balance or attempt to balance health versus wealth. And of course, the Tories messed it up. And why did they do that? Because they don't care enough about health. They don't care about the health of citizens, and they don't care about the wealth of the country. The Tories are only interested in maintaining the wealth of their donors. They're only interested in caring about health if there's some way they can sell it off. That's all they're interested in. It's about making a profit for people who, and eventually sitting on the board of one of these companies when they're kicked out of office. Now, he also talked about how other parts of the UK are actually doing better than England in this case, in respect to the pandemic. And despite the actions of the Tories, Scotland and Wales have managed to do much better. Now, if this isn't a reason to support Scottish independence and further ahead down the road, perhaps Welsh independence, I don't know what is. These two countries have demonstrated that they are capable of managing this pandemic in a much better way than Boris Johnson could ever hope for. Now, why is this the case? Why is Scotland and Wales doing a much better job than England? Well, it comes down to the simple fact that Scotland and Wales care about their people. They care about their citizens. They haven't put business before the lives of the people living in their respective countries. The Tories have put business before lives. The Tories were advised by experts, by the scientific community in the UK, to implement a lockdown as soon as possible. Boris Johnson waited and waited and waited. The Cheltenham Festival went ahead. Why the hell did that festival go ahead when there was a pandemic on the loose? Why did it go ahead? Well, it went ahead because if they had cancelled it, it would have pissed off Tory donors. The rich class, the people who donate to the party, the people who maintain the party. It was about not upsetting those people. Their privilege was put ahead of public health. And of course that facilitated the spread of the pandemic. Now, one of the most important messages I think we should all take away from James O'Brien's rant, or epic rant, is the idea that being right, being proven right, does not fix the problem. It doesn't pay the bills. Now, I have been ranting and raving about Brexit for a long time, a number of years now, and I always wanted to be wrong because the information I was giving was negative, was pessimistic. I was afraid about what was going to happen to Northern Ireland. I was afraid that the choice would be a border between the Republic and Northern Ireland, and this would be damaging to the peace process, or that there would be a border down the Irish Sea and the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland would eventually reunite. But I understand the problems related to that because of the fears within the loyalist and unionist community towards a united Ireland. So I raised those issues, and of course most of these issues were ignored. And it's not just me who was raising these issues. Many people who are on the Remain side raised the issue of Northern Ireland. Of course, the issue of immigration. Where are you going to get staff? Boris Johnson talked about we're going to hire thousands and thousands of new nurses, but at the same time we're going to make it more difficult for the NHS to hire those nurses. And people on the Remain side were saying how this was a problem, and now it's turning out to be a problem. We talked about how there would be tailbacks in port towns like Dover, and of course this was all dismissed as Project Fear. And just a few weeks ago, Boris Johnson's government is building lorry parks to deal with tailbacks. Now, despite being right about a great deal of issues surrounding Brexit, about the negative impacts, Remainers have never gloated about this. Remainers have never said, see, we were right, you were wrong, haha, suck it up. And why is that? It's because Remainers actually cared about British people. They cared about the working class. They cared about what was going to happen to the United Kingdom. Well, if you contrast that with Brexiteers who gloat about how much damage is going to be inflicted upon the UK, because it's the cost of freedom. It's a cost that those individuals are not going to pay. Someone else is going to pay. It's very easy to sit back and say, we should damage our country if you're not the one who's going to suffer the damage. Finally, James O'Brien asked a very poignant question. He asked, what will the liars and cheats do next? So we've seen how they were able to convince people to support Brexit by voting against their own interests. We've seen how they were able to convince people to support Boris Johnson based on a lie. And in some cases, people blatantly knew it was a lie. The liars and the cheats convinced the public that it wasn't necessary for the UK to be part of an EU procurement scheme for PPE, for example, or for ventilators. The UK could do it all on their own. They didn't need to be part of the EU because of Brexit. But as they are exposed as liars and cheats on the issue of Brexit, on the issue of the pandemic, they need to deflect. They need to move on to a new topic. And what is that new topic? Well, it's immigration, the old stomping ground of the right wing. Blame people who have no power. Back in the 90s, in the early 2000s, it was about blaming single mothers or people on welfare, people who had no power, once again, people who had no voice. And this time around, it's about blaming immigrants because they have no power and they have no voice. It's a way of distracting from the failures of Boris Johnson and his government. If people are distracted, they're not looking at what damage we're doing. And roll on the end of the transition period, you're just going to see more and more of this toxic rhetoric towards immigrants, for example, because they're an easy scapegoat. They deflect. They change the narrative. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. Why not become a Patreon and enjoy access to our Discord server where we share news, chat, and have some fun? If you become a patron, you can also make video suggestions on topics that are important to you. Check it out via the link in the description.